Have you founded startups before?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I've worked at a couple of startups also, and I've done my own startup also. I ran something for around 4 years or so.
Nice. Okay.
We were essentially creating smaller mobile applications for other startups as a service side, and we
Nice.
had two products.
Nice.
It didn't work out that well, but yes, that was a good learning experience
Oh,
also.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just even to try and do that is amazing, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah. That's great.
So, right.
All right,
Are we
I'm
on?
ready.
Just about.
I'm ready. You ready?
Yep.
All right. So tonight, well, tomorrow his time, I guess, because he's all the way from Delhi. We've got Ankit Pandey with us. He's founded a couple startups and he's ran some startups before, but really we're here to talk about his interest in astrology, Vedic astrology to be specific. He's been into that for about 8 to 10 years, so we thought we'd have a chit chat with him. I think Darren and him are Twitter buddies. I think that's how Darren found him.
I
I'm not
can't
sure. I can't
remember
remember how
who
you
connected
did.
us on Twitter. Someone, somehow we got mentioned in the same tweet, and
Right.
here we are. The world's fast moving that way
Yeah.
in a lot of regards these days.
So thanks for joining us, Ankit. How's it going?
Thanks for inviting me over. It's a good day, good sunny day out here. And as we just mentioned, we have our Independence Day also. We have Raksha Bandhan also. So a really good day to do certain things and do good stuff.
Nice, nice. Yeah, it's like we were talking a little bit before. We probably have a lot more things in common that you might think with the stuff we've been talking about on the show and your interest in astrology and you know these bigger life questions, right?
Right. It's so something like an existential crisis is something that everybody sort of faces at a certain point of time in their lives.
Yep.
Um, and when you start to ask yourself those questions, either you get into a state which is sort of depressing, which doesn't give any answers, or you start to get into probably a spiritual side of understanding life. Some of the things which have already been said by different religions and different sects, and some others which are probably being written new as new philosophers and new people come across. Um, so while this was on, I'll just continue from here. While this was on, probably a few years ago, I found certain patterns and certain things happening within my own life, certain specific dates, um, and it was just a random coincidence. So when you start observing those,
Mm-hmm.
there's probably a placebo at times. There's probably something like that you're noticing too much into it,
Yep.
but then it happened too frequently to call it a coincidence.
We call it
And that's when you
we call it a synchronicity here in a way.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's when you start diving deeper into it. But then, because there's so much information available everywhere, it's just slightly overwhelming when you first dive into it. So one needed to give it a structure, and that's when I realized that I need to probably get into a proper structured course of Vedic astrology and go ahead and pursue it and see how it actually functions and whether it does to the extent what these people claim or it doesn't from a scientific perspective. So that's where I'm at. I'm sort of in the middle of researching how Vedic astrology functions, and also trying to dive deeper into the nuances of it. By functioning, I mean from a scientific perspective,
Yeah, yeah,
whether
yeah.
Did you come out
whether
skeptical at first? Like, did you go into the whole thing skeptical before the synchronicities started happening?
uh, not exactly. So there was obviously a bias. That's why I jumped into it. I would say during my teens, which is around 10, 15 years ago, I was a complete atheist. I was a complete. So in India, we do have idol worship. I mean, majority of the Hindus do worship idols and do go to the temples and all of that. And that was something that I, at a certain point in time, felt very disconnected with as to why we're doing that. It doesn't make any sense
Mm-hmm.
because that's how we've all sort of grown over a period of time. But then over a period of time, when certain things start to happen, and then you start to read more or try and experience those things more, it's maybe a bias, but then it does. I mean, you do get involved in it, and then you do get seeing those things. Uh, So yeah, there was probably some sort of a bias in the beginning, but I still am at a stage where if it does get proven wrong completely, I'm happy to accept it the way it is,
Yeah.
because I truly do still believe in science and how it functions.
Yeah.
But then I do also understand Jyotish to quite a this thing level. So I do want to understand how. I am still trying to understand how it's
What
functions.
made you pick astrology? What made you pick Vedic astrology to go in instead of maybe something more like occult, or like why that?
Um. So see, so to understand this, one needs to get to the core of things. If you observe, or if you go to the deeper layers of what Jyotish or what astrology is, it is essentially a mathematical assimilation or a mathematical structure given to all the past karmas that you have, and how it will sort of proceed. So whatever happens in your life, you could understand it through various means, by tarot cards, by coffee cup readings, or by anything of that sort. But then a lot of those are much more artistic, much more
Subjective.
um,
Yeah.
subjective in some
Yeah.
sense. But if you need some sort of a logical structure behind it,
Yeah.
then Vedic astrology serves that purpose. And
Ah, okay.
coming from an engineering background, coming from a scientific background, it made a lot more sense to dive or to get deeper into it. Also, another thing was that probably, I don't know if you know about it. Out here in India, we do have lots and lots of Jyotishi, lots and lots of Vedic astrologers, and many families who are, or I mean, I would say a huge number of families who have even the slightest inclination of religion within them, or a slightest bent of religion within them. Some of the people would still go to astrologers and get their janam kundlis and all those things done from the start. So for example, babies kundlis are made just at the time of the birth. I mean, after they're born, just a few weeks from that. What are the kind of things that the baby should probably what are the kind of things that we should take care of about the baby? And they would regularly visit these priests, regularly visit these pandits to understand if there is a problem coming by, if we should be aware of certain things, etc., all those kind of things. So it's sort of ingrained within the Hindu culture in some sense,
Is
and
that
that's how you.
sorry? Is that sort of like I'm kind of comparing that as to in the West would be kind of like, I guess, what we're just sort of getting into personality types and stuff like that. Would it be that
Probably
sort of
yes.
same thing?
Yes. You probably. I think there's 16.
Yeah,
basic
that's
types.
right. Yeah, the Jungian
Right.
archetypes and stuff like that. That would sort of be the Indian version of that in a lot of ways.
To a certain extent, yes. People do then ask these questions about how it would happen, what will happen, and then if there are certain remedies or certain pujas that need to be done, and how we can probably overcome these things. But then at the end of the day, ultimately, uh, every priest or every pandit out here does try and push this forward, that it is all about your karma. So if you've done something wrong earlier, something wrong might happen to you. You can probably just decrease the extent or the level of whatever happens to you, but you can't completely overcome that karma unless you've gone through that pain.
Right.
You have a debt to pay.
Yes, you have a debt to pay. I mean, if you look around, everybody is dealing with some struggle in their life. Everybody around everybody. Right? So that's what it is about.
I feel like your culture is more open to different ideas than us in the West in a way. Like, you know, the yogas that come from your area, like all these people, you know, flooding into India from over here to learn how to do yoga properly and how to teach yoga, and I feel like it's more of a spiritual openness there.
It is because see, if we just go down to history, I mean, I can't compare the two because I haven't been there, and it's a very the comparison is probably not that much. But then if we just go down back to the history, you'll see that the majority of the scientists who were here, or who I won't call them regular scientists, but then the people who were philosophers who studied different things, whether from a perspective of how the human body functions or how the space functions or what are the different planets and sun and moon and all those things. They were also very spiritual, and majority of the things that they've sort of researched on or got have been through meditation. Because this is a question that I get asked a lot number of times, that how was probably astrology discovered, or how did people find out about it? And one of the answers that I sort of give out, and I'm not sure how right or wrong this is, but then that's the way I sort of see it, or that's the way I've sort of understood after reading different texts, different things here and there, that if you're sort of still, if you just sit and go and meditate at a certain place, you start to understand your own body functions. You start to understand what's going inside your body, what's coming outside your body. This stage probably after you start understanding your breath. I mean, that's the first step that most people talk about. You understand your breath, how it's functioning, and then you start to understand your body. And at a certain point in time, if you're doing it for many, many years, and probably a decade or two, you will then understand how your body is interacting with the environment outside. And that's how probably all of it started many thousands of years ago, that once they understood this, they started passing on this knowledge to people or to their own students. And then it started to get structured in some manner.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's almost like the Western version of it was, it had to be one or the other. There was no way for science and spirituality to really coexist. I mean, I think we're just kind of really seeing the renaissance of that here now, where spirituality is trying to creep back in places like, China, India. These places have kind of been saying it the whole time. And, we spent 100 years saying, look at these guys are fucking crazy. And then we're like, well, fuck. It turns out, I mean, it's the same thing that I'm a native or an Indian from here, an Aboriginal. So, I mean, my people were doing the same thing a few hundred years ago too. You know what I mean? It just seems to be the new
West,
that tried to just really detach from all that. And I mean, we were just talking about that earlier tonight, about how once you start down that path of choosing logic over spirituality, or of almost like logic, trying to explain materialism, trying to explain away the placebo effect. And I worry that that's a real possibility, that you could explain away the placebo effect. You could convince yourself to such an extent that it's not possible, that it loses that possibility of being possible.
Right. To quite an extent, yes. It's interesting because, and it's a very apt moment in these years. If you just look at the recent things that have been happening specifically with respect to media and the fake videos that can come out, that your face can get replaced by mine or whatever. We are seeing this sort of revolution, or sort of this change, where you can't believe any news as such. And it will eventually all come down to belief system. What do you believe in? What do I believe in? And that's essentially what we are coming back to over a period of time. We've all the entire cycle of logic has been there, but because there are so many data points available, and we've all sort of come to a stage where we're working with data or on data, certain people obviously can prove anything by any kind of data. And with that, it probably just boils down to the belief system. What do you believe in?
Yeah, I agree. It's
and that's sort of scary also.
Yeah, because when I remember this from 10, 12 years ago when I started listening to podcasting, and when the internet when everybody started to really get on the internet. And I thought the truth in the middle is going to be where everybody conglomerates. We're all going to come to this common truth. And really what happened, and we realized this 12 years ago, everybody became polarized because they just took whatever data that reinforced their belief system and used that and ignored the rest of the data. So that was really eye-opening and scary for me. I was like, this is not this is not going to go well when we're all going apart instead of towards some common middle.
Well, you know what's interesting is I can't remember what book I was just reading or listening to, but they were talking about how where we're headed, and we're not that far off, is it's going to get to the point where the algorithms are running fucking everything. And it's going to be the point where no one, it's going to get to the point where we're going to get to the AI, we're going to get the AI algorithm, and eventually the AI is going to get to the point where it can start writing its own algorithms better than we are. At which point, we're going to lose total control of what the machines and the AI are up to. And our whole entire life is probably going to be planned out to us to a certain extent. And cars are going to pick you up and drive you places that you don't even know where you're going. But it's figured out in some future timeline that this is the best thing for you to do at this moment is to go get in this car. And he kind of spins it off, and he's like, and people are going to find that, if you dress a certain way, maybe the algos will favor you. And if you're kind to people and you lead an honest life, the algos will be good to you. And if you steal and you're bad, then the algos will be bad to you. And it'll totally just replace religion.
I would still have my doubts with respect to all of it replacing religion as such, because that closeness or that binding that religion sort of gives to a lot of people will be very difficult, because you can overcome religion only by logic. You can understand it only through logic, and it's very difficult for everybody to become logical, because as I said, we're going towards a place where we're again working only on our belief systems, where we're probably just heading towards again on our belief systems. And if you're saying that the divide is happening, which we're all seeing, then it is about belief, and belief will always remain ingrained with religion in some sense, probably. But then it's interesting that you point this out, that there is a divide. On one hand, there is a divide, but then on the other hand, and this is what I sort of am sort of trying to study in some sense. If you understand the basic concept or basic underlying concept of pretty much all the religions, every religion has either the 10 commandments or 5 things that you're supposed to do, or 10 things that you should be worried, that you should be continuing with your life. All of these things boil down to a simple fact as to why are these things talked about in a specific manner, and what is it that they do within the human body, which sort of help you out. So I'll give a very example out here, a small example. If you're talking about telling the truth or always saying the truth, it in some ways affects the chakra out here, which is closer to your heart.
Yeah.
If you're talking about not being aggressive or not hurting somebody, it talks about the base chakra, which is the Mooladhara chakra. And with the understanding of the chakra theory, one can sort of relate all religions to the same base level. And this is where the research on astrology also starts, because that, I understand to a certain extent, is sort of the codified version of how the chakras are reacting with the universe as such, or how the chakras are reacting with the world as such. It gives a structure not just to the human bodies. You can apply the same Vedic astrology on a notebook, on a pen, or on a building, or any inanimate object also. And that's where the study is sort of, or I'm sort of getting towards. Because if you're able to connect these two in some manner, if you're able to understand, and that understanding of religion boiling down to the chakras is very easy. Whether you talk about Islam, whether you talk about any of the Abrahamic religions, or whether you talk about any of the Indic religions per se, the Eastern religions per se, all of them can boil down to this. It's only about relating the other side. And once you're able to understand or give a very good structure, scientific structure to astrology, it just sums it all up and fits it all up, which sort of creates an underlying pattern towards world peace. And those are larger goals. Those are very, very large goals. But then, yes, it can be a logical discussion or a logical conclusion towards these things.
Yeah, that makes
Am I?
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So when you entered into this astrology, like starting to study it with a background of open-mindedness, but also some atheism when you were younger, was it surprising? Were the results surprising to you that you thought, okay, there is some scientific structure here, or are you still in that search for that kind of
So yes.
fundamental grasping of it?
So there are certain things within Vedic astrology which you need to take on the face of it.
Okay.
For example, Mars is an aggressive planet, or moon controls the emotions. When you apply it on different charts, when you apply it on anybody's chart, those things can be seen, those things can be very easily understood by talking to the person and by sort of predicting, and then those events in some sense coming true. But then why is it happening is something that is not very clear.
Right.
So that's something which I won't call myself a skeptic on it, because it's probably there. I do see that happening. But then to convince or to actually put it out there in the scientific community, it needs to be understood as to why that is happening. Why would Venus represent the feminine side of humans? Not just females, but the feminine side between you, me, and everybody else.
Wow, yeah.
Why would Jupiter represent all sorts of wisdom, all sorts of higher wisdom?
And who knows what it could be? It could be like the position of all the other planets, the electromagnetic spectrum, or something that planet's giving off. I mean, it's all a big mix of locations and forces, and which could have an effect on the way we are. Right?
So there are two ways to go about this. One of the ways is obviously one tries to understand whether it's the gravitational waves, whether it's those kind of things. The other is to understand is probably something like the Gaia theory, or theories which talk about everything being connected, the microcosm and the macrocosm, which even the Vedic text talked about to quite an extent, that everything is sort of affecting each other. If you see it from that perspective, then the planets or the grahas are not affecting you. You're both interconnected. So if something happens in your life, something happens over there also. And if something is happening over there, it's happening in your life also. And this then gets applied to different other things. So the coffee cup readings, or the tarot readings, or readings of the palm, all those kind of things, or just reading lines on the forehead. Because it's all connected, you are just using that, which becomes a clock. Because that's the most brilliant clock in some sense, which everybody can sort of see. It's a very good cycle. And if you're seeing it in that manner, it's just a reading. It's not that they are affecting you or you're affecting them. You're just reading it through different means.
Okay, that's
it's like going to Wikipedia.
Sorry?
It's the same as going to a Wikipedia. It's just, it's just like, it's not personal, or it doesn't matter who's reading you, or what state you're in, or anything like that. It's just okay. It's in that sense, it is very sort of scientific, right? It's because it's like, I even felt like that when I was getting my star chart reading by Michael Wan. The way he just says, okay, well, you were born on this day, and this planet was here, and this planet was here, and the sun was there, and that means this. And I mean, I'm not a big astrology guy, but every time I get a reading, I'm fucking floored. And I don't know if, I would say I am going into it. I mean, the last one less. I mean, the longer I do the podcast, the less skeptical I become about things. Mm-hmm. But I mean, even the first ones, I mean, there's something to those, and you can't read the horoscope in the newspaper. That doesn't work. But when you get a real reading, there's something about it when these people don't know. And I got to wonder about it in these later years where someone can listen to the show and where I've got thousands of hours of audio online. But in the first ones, when we didn't, and people, honestly, these people don't know me from a fucking hole in the ground. And it's just, they tell you stuff and you're just like, wow. I mean, and it's weird. When I was younger, I used to notice with names is that people with certain names had certain personality traits. And I can't remember but I don't know which culture it is, but that's actually, I just found out the other day in an audiobook I was listening to that there's entire cultures that actually they choose the name based on that because they feel like that your given name has
power
over you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
It controls your destiny.
Right. So I'll add on to this. So one of the practices out here in the Hindu families is essentially, and that's sort of dying out in some sense, if I may call it that. But then people still do that. The traditional families still do that. That wherever the moon is placed at the time of the birth of the baby, the starting alphabet of the nakshatra is used to actually name the baby. So the names are not found out before the birth of the baby. They are decided after the baby is born and the time of the baby is born. There's also very interesting text called, so there's a whole series of texts. There are Vedas, there are Upanishads, there are other granths that we have, there are other text bodies that we have, and one of the Upanishads is called a Nad Bindu Upanishad, which essentially talks about how different sounds affect different parts of your body.
Yeah.
There are, of course, different studies around this, that probably certain frequencies affecting certain parts of your body, but then that details it out to quite a lot of extent. And now imagine this, that somebody is calling you by your name all through your life. Everybody is calling you by the same name. So it's a certain specific sound which you are being addressed to or you're hearing all through your life, and then you're responding to that also. It is bound to have some sort of an effect.
Yeah.
So that's how it sort of controls it. The problem with all of these things is that because all of these texts are written in Sanskrit, and over the period of past 200 years or so, there are not many people who are venturing out into Sanskrit. Of course, for the past 5-6 years, we've seen that resurgence coming out here within India also, that people are getting more involved in it and trying to dig out stuff from what was written earlier. But then a lot of it has been lost also. So that's where we're at. It's interesting that you pointed it out with respect to sound.
Yeah, that's interesting because I mean, even in some of the occult and magic practices, like you can pronounce, Yeshua or whatever, some of these deities or these sacred names that have a vibration and a power to them. You can even do soul resonance things with your own names based on your consciousness or your subconscious or your higher self. So yeah, imagine being called a vibration, a name with a vibration that doesn't resonate with you, right? And how that affects you over time. Right?
That was my 20s.
What was your name?
It was the same name, but I was just a different person.
You had a different dasha going on back then, probably.
That's right, 100%. So I wanted to ask you, with the Sanskrit text, I mean, that would basically be the version of the scrolls from the Bible. There's a lot of complaining about how, only certain scrolls were included and other ones were squirreled away. And the whole Catholic Christian message seems to be extremely controlled and convoluted. And you can have this, but you can't have that. And you can decipher it, I think, in my personal experience, but you got to connect some dots. With the Sanskrit, do you guys have that same sort of problem in India, or is it all pretty open, or do you feel okay with it?
No. To quite a large extent, it was sort of similar. So every village out here within India had a temple, or probably had more than one temple also, and those temples were centers of learning. Now, it initially started off, and probably I'm talking about maybe thousands of years ago, if you go through those things, where everybody was sort of included. Anybody could come and study and do those kind of things. But over a period of time, it sort of, when those things became power structures, and when those kind of people sort of started coming into different places in different areas at power heads, you could see a dilution of this particular system, and only certain people were allowed. So what happened over a period of time, that probably the knowledge was only given to the Brahmins and the lower caste, and that caste system was originally, as I said, was devised based upon the kind of work that you're doing. You're called an engineer, you're called a YouTuber or whatever, and that's how we named, or those caste system was earlier prevalent. What it over a period of time translated into, or evolved into, was that only a certain sect of people will be eligible to get those knowledge, will be eligible to get that particular knowledge. So the Dalits were not probably treated right, and those sort of things happened. But then it's the battle is still ongoing. That is still prevalent in some rural areas, but then it is now much more open. In fact, if I talk about specifically with respect to astrology, it wasn't even left to the Brahmins or the upper castes as such. What used to happen is that these kings, I mean, there were almost around 300, 400 kingdoms all across India. And these kings, most of them had a Vedic astrologer who was a part of the court. Now, these people were the ones who could research, who had the access to knowledge, who had the resources of the king that they could utilize and create or write good structures in Sanskrit, which would help out the later generations also to study and to understand these things. Again, within these communities, what happened is that those traditions were left only to particular families. So particular families started or had control over those texts, and they started ruling it. And that knowledge never came out of that family. Because of this, some traditions or some kinds of understanding has already been lost out, because the families have died out, or the generations have found newer ways to work or newer ways to find a living. But then lots of interesting astrologers and lots of gurus over here have gone around all over India, specifically Sri K.N. Rao, who's my guru as such, gone across all over India, spoken to these different astrologers of different gharanas and different kingdoms as such, and got these texts assimilated together. This has probably happened in the past 30, 40 years or so. And this is specifically with respect to astrology, that the accumulation of knowledge has sort of happened, which is now available to everybody as such. And with respect to Vedic texts also, that was prevalent, but largely it's now open for everybody to understand and go and read. What is still a problem is that many of these texts, I mean, the language has probably evolved over a period of years, right? So if I understand Sanskrit, I can probably read certain parts of Sanskrit. But then if we go more back in time, then those texts are probably in Sanskrit, in Pali, and in other couple of other languages mixed together. So that understanding of that is probably much more than difficult for lots of people, which is where you need to find those proper gurus, which is where you need to find those teachers and figure out if that can happen. Jeez. Largely, it's become open to quite an extent.
Yeah. Have you heard about Jesus being a yogi? Like from when he was that first 33 years of his life traveling around India and learning yoga and the Kachara Mudri?
I've heard about it, but I haven't gone deeper into it because I mean, it's a weird thing out here in India that I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but then there's a tendency for the past 5-6 years that everything that happens outside, we've Indians sort of tried taking a credit for it ourselves.
Yeah.
That yes, probably India has been the flower pot of doing this or doing that. Yeah. Unless it's a proper structured text which was probably written certain centuries ago. I mean, if there's no valid proof, then again we're in that stage where you can't believe either of these things.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I just thought it was an interesting theory, you know, and they were talking about the Kachari Mudra, where you can put your tongue up up the back of your passage, and a lot of these things that are from the Bible, like relating it to just your own spiritual yogic experience. It's interesting.
But that is right. There's another very interesting thing now that you mentioned Jesus, and this is again related to the same understanding of chakras in some sense. If you look at all the pictures of any of the gods that are there, whether in Abrahamic religions or in Indic religions, they have a halo. And even if you look at Islamic prophets, I mean, Allah is obviously not drawn as such, but any other prophets that have come after that, that they're allowed to draw, or certain sects are allowed to draw, they've been given a halo as such. Now, if you try and understand what exactly is the halo, and why does it exist across all of these, it's a slightly different theory. But then if you look at any person who's very healthy, or just look at maybe a mother who's at the peak of her pregnancy as such, you'll see that glow in their face. Now, if you come across people who are doing yoga regularly, or who are probably very healthy, you'll see that slight glow on their faces also. That essentially is the chakras over here sort of having an increase in energy. Now, once you have all the chakras connected and opened up, and there are no health issues within your body, all of this sort of brightens up. And it's not like you're throwing off that light completely, but then it sort of glows to quite a lot extent. It's something like putting a very good moisturizer, but to a very large extent. When that happens, that is where you come to a stage which is sort of understanding the gods, or understanding the people who are regarded as gods. There's no doubt that maybe Muhammad existed, maybe Jesus Christ existed, Buddha existed, all of these people existed. But then, why were they regarded as gods? Probably because they had that sort of energy where they could control lots of things within their surroundings in some manner.
Yeah.
Which is what people call the aura.
The aura, yeah.
Yeah, right. So all of that sort of ties up to the understanding of this entire scheme of things. Whether you talk about astrology, whether you talk about understanding of God, whether you talk about such things.
It gets more into the Christ consciousness part of it. It's like the spiritual aspect of Jesus, and not the religious one so much. Yeah,
probably yes.
Which is probably more accurate. I mean, in a lot of ways, that's where what I was talking about when I was saying that whole message sort of seems to have gotten hijacked, and they left certain parts of it out. Like, personally, I think that faith is meant to be in yourself, and it's more of, I don't know, it's hard to say, but it definitely seems to be more along those lines of, your faith should be more in yourself and your humanity than some dude with a beard up in the sky sitting on a cloud and making decisions. It's kind of like instead of wishing for things to be better, just go be better. Try that for a day.
Right. Within this, there's also an interesting thought. Lots of times I often get asked the question that is there, like, is everything fate? Is everything pre-decided? If you believe in astrology, if you believe or if you understand astrology, is there a difference between the two? And if there is somebody or something that is controlling us, then is there no free will as such? And that's a debate that probably no one can answer. But then we were discussing this within ourselves, within the groups as such, and we came across this. There's quite a decent understanding of how it functions. So, if you look at people who have a high drive, who have a very good motivation to do certain things, and who are sort of focused, you will see that they're probably working towards that also for quite a while. Their chakras sort of get aligned, and their focus of the entire body and the energy sort of get aligned into a specific mission. So whether you talk about maybe say people like Elon Musk who are trying to do those things, or other scientists and explorers who are good in their specific fields. On the other hand, if you also look at the yogis who are just trying to do that, who are just trying to create a balance within their bodies as such from the outside, they've also sort of like specifically Swami Vivekanand, he sort of specifically mentioned that you could once you try and balance yourself with the universe, if you focus on anything, you can make that happen. Now, what's interesting to note here is that, and it's written in one of these books that K.N. Rao is, sorry, go on.
So wait, are we talking about manifestation?
Sorry?
Are we talking about manifestation when you're talking about that? Is if you can get your center to the right place, if you can get, then you can pull things out, pull things out, create your own reality?
I don't know manifestation. I'm not sure of that.
Well, manifest, like you can if you can become one with the universe, you can control reality. You can make things happen.
Yes, absolutely. And the way to do it, as I understand, is probably being completely healthy in some sense, and that's sort of the thing that religion also teaches. That if you're able to understand your emotions and focus on certain things, or focus on maybe a single thing with that balance, you should be able to do that. Now, how does this function is probably, and I'll come back to the fate and free will part over here because it's sort of tied up. It is said that probably you, or probably anybody who comes onto this planet, is given somewhere around 5 to 10% of free will. They're sort of tied with a string or tied with a rope. They can either go around in circles or do whatever they want within that entire circle they sort of create. Now, but the more you create a healthy lifestyle and have a healthy body and probably do yoga or probably do any of these practices which sort of open up the mind also and give you that free will sort of increases.
Wow.
Because
and it even starts to overlap.
Yes. And what you're essentially doing is
other free wills.
What you're essentially doing is that you're increasing the energies of different parts of your chakra. And you are then moving your aura or increasing the energy of the aura, spreading it out wide. If you're able to do that, then you should be able to convince people to do things with you. You should be able to motivate them also. And you should be able to, or you can have that confidence to actually, can have that, not confidence, but the focus to do certain things also. And that's when you increase the free will quotient to probably 10, 15, 20, 30% or so, which is what they talk about. And which is what we've seen people do time and again when they are focused and dedicated on a specific thing.
That's really 100%.
I mean, I agree 100% that it's like that. Once you have to keep that, you start to lose that influence if you start to lose track of adding value, being of service, putting other people before yourself, which are sort of those same tenets that religion is trying to tell you. And it's kind of like you can grow your aura big enough to start, you can't take someone else's aura over, but you can sort of overlap it just enough. And,
Okay, but there's the physical part, you're talking about the aura, but there's also the metaphysical part that means if you're getting all your chakras lined and you're creating that aura, you're also connecting to something that could be wherever.
Well, that's what's allowing you to grow.
Time and space is not even relevant. I mean, maybe that energy is going to whatever in the universe needs to come back to you.
And
it's resonating.
That's why the high level people are the people that I think, in our society, they probably come out as successful entrepreneurs in a lot of sense. And, they get painted with this thing that all rich people are evil. But I'm really starting to think that if you dial that down and you go start talking to them, I really think that that is kind of maybe what's holding some people back, is you start getting that thought that money and success and abundance are evil. And that could almost be fucking against you in that thing. And I mean, I don't know, maybe rich people aren't as evil as we think they are. I mean,
they just have more free will. They've created more free will for themselves.
Right.
Exactly. And if you want to believe in a world like we're talking about here, then they've created that karma in a certain extent somehow. Or they're just sucking kids' bloods on an island down in the Caribbean someplace, and they're doing it all like that.
This sort of also ties back to the fact that when a chart comes across to us, to lots of astrologers, the first question that we sort of ask them is that, are you into any sort of spiritual practice? Because if you are, then you don't need an astrologer to guide you or to help you out. You can shape or you can push your life into whatever direction you want, provided you are balanced and you are sort of spiritually inclined in some sense. Whether you're going to a temple or a mosque or whatever, or whether you're just sitting in the morning and lighting a small candle and just sitting there for a while, whatever your spiritual practice is, if you're sort of doing that innately, and if you're trying to understand or going within your body and trying to understand that, one doesn't probably require any sort of seeing by any of fortune tellers or foreseers or astrologers or tarot readers or whatever.
But would it help to release your chakras, increase your chakras? Like, what kind of practice would you recommend to reach more of a awareness or more of a flow between your chakras? Like, is that where you get into the pranic healing and that type of thing to cleanse that?
So I would recommend any sort of traditional yoga. Or any sort of traditional practice that comes, not just maybe yoga, but maybe doing something like a tai chi, right? Which is essentially understanding the energy flow within your body. But the thing with all of this is that it's very difficult to find authentic and traditional things. I mean, I've been seeing across bear yoga and goat yoga, which is completely sort of blown my mind. Why is this happening? What is the point and what is the relevance of doing a bear yoga or doing a goat yoga?
Beer or beard?
I saw beer.
Oh, beer. Okay.
Beer. Yes, I saw that the couple of courses or the couple of institutes in US that are probably doing that. You do one pranayam and one this thing, and you can take a sip of beer, and then by the end of it, you're sort of very high and zoned out.
Well, at least
you can do that with the cannabis. I think is a better use.
Anything to get people on the mat. Anything to get people on the mat.
That's from the guy that doesn't go on the mat.
You
used to glow so well.
Yeah, I know. I got to get that glow back. I know. So what's a traditional yoga then? Because there's so many different names now, right? I mean, there's all these different Ashtanga and Vinyasa.
Yeah, so Ashtanga yoga, Hatha yoga, Bikram yoga also to a certain extent, and that's quite prevalent in the West, from what I understand, is a teaching of that. There are many institutes, from what I understand. There's Isha Yoga, there's Sri Sri Ravi Shankar's Art of Living, and there are many others also.
Yeah.
So it's essentially that. But the understanding is to actually firstly understand what one is diving into. And only then, there is of course lots of literature, there is of course lots of things written. But then to a certain extent, one can find out what is new and what is the old one. See, and I'll add a very interesting dimension out here. The lunar nodes that are there, that exist in astrology, I don't know how much you've heard about those.
A little bit. Yeah, we did our chart. Okay. We did our charts, and we talked about the lunar stuff at one point.
I don't know.
Okay. So within astrology, within the Vedic astrology, we don't call planets as planets because they are not all planets. There's the sun also, there's the moon also. These are called grahas. Graha essentially means something which takes hold of you. Grahan kar lena. I'm talking in Hindi. Grahan kar lena means something which takes hold of you or takes control of you. Now, two of these grahas, yes,
Would
please.
that be in like a gravitic sense?
Yes. I'm talking completely in Vedic sense.
Okay.
This is
Oh
one
no,
of
sorry,
the,
I said gravitic,
I
like
thought it was like
gravity.
I thought it was like lycanthropy, like the moon takes control.
I was thinking
Gravity.
gravitational. Yeah.
Not sure of that. I haven't dived deeper into that. It just says Grahan, which means taking control.
Yeah, to me, that just, as
And
soon as you said that, I thought that's like a weird fucking spiritual way to say gravity.
it could be that. It could be, it could be that. It's just one needs to decide on that. So, two of these grahas, which are called the North Node and the South Node, in Vedic astrology, we call them as Rahu and Ketu. Rahu is essentially something that is very new. That is, it's something like when you're walking down the road and there's lots of fog, you don't know what will happen, but you're constantly, that thirst and that hunger for finding out something new always exists within you. So you're constantly walking. There are at times good things that you encounter, there are times when there are bad things that you encounter, and that is where most of the energies of people, wherever the Rahu is placed, wherever North Node is placed, go within their lifetime. Ketu is something which is the past summation of all the lifetimes that you've had, all the experiences that you've been through, all the things that you've done in your previous lives, and that's why you're sort of detached from all of those things. Now, the entire life cycle sort of revolves between these two things: what you're supposed to do, what you want to do, and falling back on the experiences that you've done to counter or to play well with those things that are happening ahead of you. Now, within the world that we're in, because technology is moving so fast and everything is happening so fast, we constantly keep on encountering newer problems. Those solutions to the newer problems, obviously, one way of finding the solution is to figuring out from what we've seen in other areas. But the other way is also trying to go deeper down behind, because as I say, the stronger the roots are, the higher the tree will grow, and the more wide it will be, right? So if we're able to understand the roots, we'll be able to understand what lies ahead, or probably not what lies ahead, but maybe face it with much more easier understanding.
What if you are you clearing your karma? Like are you clearing or cleansing your karma when you go back to strengthen those roots? Are you dealing with your past karma? No?
Not exactly dealing with your past karma, but taking experiences and understanding from that as to how to face what is happening in the front. So
it's almost like looking at your experiences a little deeper than just surface level to see what you might have missed.
Yes, to some extent, yes. But then more to techniques like maybe past life regression, maybe things where you can understand that, and maybe understanding the chart from a perspective of what is the karma that I'm supposed to deal with. And if one does not want to go near all those things, then maybe doing or taking a yogic route, and taking a traditional yogic route, which helps in countering the problems that one is facing in today's life. It's a simple example. There's too much information, there's too much confusion in the head. You sit down to meditate for an hour every day, or just 15 minutes every day, and it sort of eases the tension. This sort of balance holds true across all facets of life in some sense. So whether you dive deeper into the knowledge, or whether you do it from a physical perspective, or whether you do from an exercise perspective, or these hypnotic or past life regression techniques, or all of those. And
what about
I picked it up because primarily yoga. Yeah.
What about entheogens?
Sorry?
What about entheogens or plant medicines? Anything like that goes along with the Indian traditions?
So you're talking specifically with respect to Ayurveda?
Just like psychedelics.
Psychedelics. So yes, they've talked about specific things. So I was going through this, like one of my friends was talking about this earlier, about how alcohol has been written about. People do talk about cannabis also as a healing medium and all of those things, and that the Western medicine is also sort of now seen over a period of past 15, 20, 30 years or so, that is helping in a lot of ways. But then, as I understand, one of the things of understanding this is that we can use it for recreational purposes, because cannabis sort of gives a wide high over here, whereas alcohol does it at the bottom of the body. But then the more you, I mean, if we don't sort of have a stronger body, then this sort of has a bad effect in the longer run. However, all of these things, whichever the nature is sort of provided, are obviously helpful within specific places when it is required for specific diseases or for healing purposes or whatever. They've been written about quite extensively in various texts. I am not an expert in those, but then yes, I know for a fact that they've been written about for quite a while. In fact, cannabis is sort of like in India, if you crush the leaves and you then make a paste out of it, it's called bhang. Now, bhang out here, do you know what a chutney is?
It's
Chutney
like,
is
it's like hash, isn't it?
No, hash is completely different, right?
Oh, okay,
But,
okay.
so I'm talking about a completely separate thing. Like you have chips with sauce.
Chutney, yeah.
And,
Oh, like kind of like hummus, sort of.
Yes. So something like a sauce, something like a mayonnaise or something of that sort. Out here in states like Himachal Pradesh and a couple of other North Indian states which are near to the hilly areas, they create bhang chutney also. Bhang chutney is essentially cannabis chutney made out of cannabis, which you can eat with your regular food. It is very less in quantity, but then that acts as a healing mechanism for certain things. Majority of the food that is prevalent in India, or that was prevalent in India, now it's been distorted and it's been mixed and matched to quite an extent. But majority of the food that was there was suited as per what the climatic conditions required and what sort of job the people are doing and what was good for them, beneficial from a spiritual perspective. So bhang chutney was probably one of those which was helpful within those regions. Of course, from a perspective of entertainment and that, hallucinogens were used and they're still used in our festival called Holi, which happens every time around March or so. The color of the festival of colors, which you might have.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
So right, so Holi is a time when you sort of, when almost everybody has a drink of bhang, and they sort of get high and stoned and all of that. So yeah, that exists. It does give a wide vision. It's good for opening up. From what I understand, it's good for opening up your thoughts and perceptions for a certain period of time. But then in the longer run, one can lose sense of reality. To actually tie down all the threads and then be grounded, one needs to have some sort of controlled usage in some sense. Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Everything in moderation, you know.
Right.
Even moderation.
Yeah.
Anything else we should get to before we start to wrap up?
No, I mean we could talk about lots of other things, but then I understand it's been a 5-hour this thing for you. I could probably go on and on about astrology and the deeper understanding of it, and probably making people understand astrology also. But then I understand the time that you spend on this is.
Well, this has been great. I mean, we'll have to do this again. This has been fantastic so far. Before we wrap up, where can our listeners track you down?
Twitter is the best medium.
Twitter
is yes.
Okay, we'll put your what's your at?
Ankit Pandey, ANKIT
Okay, we'll make sure we put that in the show notes.
Yeah, we should do this again for sure. It's been been a fun chat.
Yeah, this was kind of came out of left field, but it's been fantastic. And I think actually we were talking before the show, we've never had someone on from India before, which is weird. We've been doing the show 6 or 7 years. We talk about this kind of stuff and it's the first time. So, we'd
Right.
love to keep in touch and talk about this a little bit more. I mean, we could spend hours just talking about cultural differences, and we could go down so many different avenues with this. It's been fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it overlaps with so much of the stuff we talk about. We were just talking about meditation earlier on tonight, and
Right.
and the chakras and manifesting. I mean, it's all so familiar too. What was I going to say about? I can't remember now.
The chat room are asking when your book's coming out.
When my book is coming out, probably a couple of years, maybe.
Perfect.
Nice. Oh, that's what I was going to say. What time is it there for you now?
It's 10 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, because sometimes we're in here on the weekend, so we could do another late one on a Saturday, like Sunday for you or Saturday for you. So,
I am up for it. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, it's been great, and we've seen the sun shining, so we got a little more proof that the Earth is probably round.
Round.
And life is good. Right on. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Ankit, and
Thanks for
joining
inviting
us
me.
on your holiday. And I'll see
Thank
you
you.
on the Twitter, and come back anytime. This has been fantastic.
We'll do that. Thank you.
All right,
Thanks
buddy.
a lot for inviting.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
And that was our chat with Ankit Pandey. What'd you think,
Yeah,
buddy?
it was really fun. Yeah.
It was kind of one of those ones, I got to say, it's like one of those days where I get up in the morning and I'm like dreading it. And you know what? It's not that I don't like podcasting. It's just that when you wake up and you're tired and it's 6 a.m. and you're getting ready for work and you're thinking, geez, I got a podcast from 4 o'clock till 11 o'clock after this. It's a little disheartening, but then I get in here and the time
And
flies
there's
by.
three
and it's
great
great,
conversations,
and,
and there's overlapping points, like I was mentioning about the meditation and the manifestation, the chakras. Like that gives us a whole new perspective on what we've been talking about.
oh yeah,
right?
like some of the stuff
The
he was
increasing
talking
the
about
free will part.
manifestation is fit perfectly into where I'm at right
But
now.
I've never thought about it as far as like increasing the free will aspect. But that's a really unique way to look at it.
That is an interesting way to look at it. If you look at that free will as being sort of your control, I mean, and it all kind of ties into some of what Peterson talks about how God being the subconscious, and Napoleon Hill talks about that's how you manipulate the universe, is getting your conscious thoughts into your subconscious somehow.
And maybe that's the way they do it.
And
Is through
that's the
centering,
way they do it.
meditation, the chakras,
I mean,
and all
everything
that.
I'm
It's just,
finding seems to be like that's the way you do it
Yeah.
here. So interesting.
like how much of it
another
comes
brick
back
in the
to
wall.
meditation. Really, like almost every show we talk about now, it comes back to this meditation.
Well, at the very least, it comes down to not being an asshole. So think about that the next time you're being an asshole. I mean, it's something I actively have been trying to do in my life. You can't do it perfectly all the time, and you slip up all the time, but you can always just say sorry after and be like, you know what, man, I was frustrated and I've had to exercise. I've been trying to exercise that in my life. Even if I have a little blow up, it's, I
didn't
owe someone an
mean to flip
apology.
you off,
I shouldn't have
Or
done
I
that.
shouldn't have
Yeah.
flipped you off. Yeah.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. So, we'll leave it at that. Big thanks to Ankit for coming on the show. Check out all his Twitters. Big thanks to you guys for listening, and a huge thanks to the few of you that choose to support, the hundreds of you that choose to support the show. Let's change that from hundreds to thousands by heading over to grimerica.ca/support today. Sign up for monthly on the Patreon, the Skype, the PayPal. Make a one-time donation. Whatever you can do to help us grow this thing into something that can make the world a better place. That's what we're trying to do here most of the time,
Most of the time.
when we're not just fucking around. Other than that, thanks for listening, and we will see you next week. Clear for the night, buddy.
All right.
All right, guys.
Clear.
Thanks for tuning in to the live, and we'll see you next week.
No, we might not actually.
No, we're taking next week off. That's right. We won't see you next week.
Well, we might. Well,
We'll
we're not
probably-
taking. We're taking Wednesday off, so it might be a different day.
And if
Yeah.
I've got actually a couple irons in the fire
Oh,
that
boy.
could pop
Yeah.
up next week.
All
Just
right.
a couple wild cards we've been trying to get for a while.
Yeah, some of those you can't say no to.